Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CoROM podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Aebhric O'Kelly. This week, we're with Dr. Michael Klopper from South Africa. Michael's been on faculty with the college for, a decade or so. He first came to Malta and ages ago, and he just earned his doctorate. He got his DHS through CoROM, one of our first graduates. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Aebhric. It's always a pleasure to do these with you.
So tell us a bit about yourself and what's keeping you busy.
So at the moment, I just successfully defended my dissertation 2 weeks ago. So up until then, the DHS was pretty much keeping me the busiest. That alongside my other day job, which is working in AI, just helping organizations navigate that ecosystem. But it's also really helping the college set up various programs, getting systems to work, and just generally trying to bridge the gap between the world of software and the world of austere and remote medicine. And now that the DHS is finally behind me, I'd like to say it's less work, but I'm quickly realizing it's even more work ahead of me.
So we'll get to your doctoral thesis on AI, but let's start way back. So what was your first connection with the college?
Well, interestingly, it all started with an email I received from you, probably way back, I'll hazard a guess, 2014. You at the time were visiting Johannesburg to set up clinical placements, I think with ER24. And you and I connected through the WMS FAWM register. And we thought, hey, I'm in Johannesburg, you're in Johannesburg, let's just have a pint together. And from there, I think I was sort of very taken in by your vision for remote and austere medicine in general. I mean, from there, that's when the roller coaster ride started. Working with you, getting those clinical placements up, helping look after the medics when they came here. At the time, I was also doing my national registry paramedic through PERCOM. And at the time, you had just received permission. I think you were the first organization to be able to offer the psychometric evaluation outside of the continental US. I then came across to Malta for a couple of weeks. I think it was the AEMT evaluation, so I completed that with you. And I think there were a few other students at the time. Then after that, came back for a month just to sit in on your industry paramedic course. So just helped out there and got a bit more familiar with how the college operates and teachers and what it was all about. Then carried on pretty much with my own mission, which was getting my fellowship of the Academy of Wilderness Medicine, finishing up my national registry paramedic, and also working or quite heavily involved in mountain search and rescue in South Africa. And really at the time, just bolstering my wilderness education wherever I could. Then one of the more ambitious projects I worked on with CoROM was setting up the field guide or the digital field guide. And that was just in such a way that it would really work in these very limited connectivity environments. And I'm pleased to say that project has been going for quite some time. Then as the college grew, just was always happy to sort of help out, try to get a few programs running in South Africa. Yeah, it was just generally, I would say, along for the ride with CoROM as it grew to what it is today.
So you have been part of the family for over a decade now.
Yes, if I had to count exactly, I'd probably say 13, 14 years.
Right, and I think that we were talking before I even left Ireland with Remote Medicine Ireland moving down to Malta. I think we had chatted before that, and then we first met in Johannesburg when I flew down in 2014, I believe it was. And we set up clinical placements with the R24. They had asked us for a critical care class, which we ran a class for them. I don't remember if you were on that one or not.
Yeah, I do remember. I think that was the first ever critical care paramedic proctored exam in South Africa.
That's right.
That one I just sat in, just helped with a bit of the facilitation of that. But I think that was on the first trip where you and I met, is getting that all set up.
Yeah, back then we were doing quite a few trips. We ran a full paramedic program out of East London there in the southern coast of South Africa.
Yeah, that's right. I do remember doing a couple of trips with you and also a few on my own. It was a very underserved area in terms of EMS. And I do remember working on quite a few interesting calls while working with the CoROM students
Yeah, hold on a
on
sec.
those placements.
I've got someone at the. Somebody just rang. Hold on a sec. A package just arrived. Hold on.
Yeah, no worries.
It was supposed to come earlier. Hopefully they'll get that one. All right, I let him in. All right, so you were talking about East London. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we had the clinical placements going down there. Then setting up some of the clinical placements in Johannesburg at the TMH in the hospital there. And yeah, also tried to, I'm trying to think of the names of some of the other courses. They escape me at the moment. But yeah, so a lot of time spent setting up clinical placements, going around and just doing as much networking as possible in South Africa.
Right. I'm trying to remember what other courses we just ran the paramedic and then the critical care paramedic in South Africa, if I remember right.
Yeah, and then the clinical placements. I mean, right back in the beginning with your remote medicine island, I did run one or two wilderness first aid courses, but not too many of those.
So, Michael, you also have your FAWM, your Fellow of the Academy of Wilderness Medicine through the Wilderness Medical Society, and you've had it now for over 5 years. Have you thought about getting your MFAWM?
Haven't. Once I had the form and looking at the calendar, I think I've had it for over 10 years. To my belief, I think I was the first person in Africa to get the award. I do stand to be corrected on that. The M form was not a high priority for me. Obviously, I had to focus on things like my National Registry paramedic. Then we went on to the Wilderness Paramedic certification and then on to the DHS. But now that I had that behind me, it's being the eternal student. That's something that's definitely on my radar, just to really give me anything that just helps with not just my own knowledge and experience of remote and osteomedicine, but that anything that just helps me help my students.
So, how do you see the FAWM helping your students?
So the form was one of my main foundational wilderness medicine qualifications. The one thing I like about the form is just the diversity of the topics that you have, or the diversity of topics or particularly in mountain medicine or wilderness medicine. That's one thing I do my best to try and instill in my students is when you are out in whatever deployment that you're on, you just need this massive breadth of knowledge and understanding. You don't necessarily need the exact answer, but you do need to know that things exist, where to get help, who to speak to, and so on. And that's just something that I found the form really helped me initially, is getting that breadth of knowledge.
I found that the FAWM was difficult for me, I'll be honest. I started in 2007, I think it was, and it took me almost 7 years to get it. No, it took me 5 years. But what I missed was a lot of the pediatric stuff or the things that we just didn't get in the Army. And I wound up with 160 points, of which only 100 of the points counted to get me past the finish line and earn my FAWM. Was that similar with yourself?
Yes, and I've actually had a few colleagues who've expressed the same, and I think that is by design. The form is one of those qualifications where, to my understanding, the DMS doesn't want form candidates to be able to rip the proverbial band-aid off and get the qualification. I think it is designed to, I don't mean to use the word force in a negative way, but to encourage candidates to get that breadth of knowledge. And oftentimes I did find you'd get these elusive credits that were very hard to get to. But it was actually the tipping scale for me on the form was when I went and actually participated in one of the conferences. And that is just a treasure trove of training information, both practical and theoretical. And I mean, I walked away from that conference not just with a couple of the elusive form credits in hand, but just a much more robust level of experience, level of training, and just understanding of the wilderness medicine environment.
It is something that I push for. So our college is one of the largest providers of FAWM credits outside the U.S. And we have 4 of our courses that give FAWM credit. And we have our student interest group because every month we hold the SIG so people can get FAWM credit there. Well, because of COVID, one of the few things that was beneficial from that fiasco was WMS has allowed virtual attendance for so one of the requirements for your FAWM, for your fellowship, is you must attend one of the conferences. And I totally understand that. But it was just unbearably painful to pay $3,000 to fly somewhere in the US. And they always hold it in resorts that are 200 a night. And it's just the costs were prohibited. And now you can attend virtually. And they've not dropped that. They've kept the virtual option, even now that COVID is over. So there's no reason why someone living here in Europe or in Africa or Asia to not get their fellowship.
Absolutely. It's living in South Africa where essentially you'll take $1 or €1 and multiply it by 20. That's one of the common complaints about getting the form. It just doesn't equate into the local currency. There is a huge demand in South Africa among physicians who would like to get the form, as well as the diploma in mountain medicine. And I think now that we have the MIM and the just virtual conferences available, I think the uptake is increasing because, as you mentioned, travel to anywhere from South Africa that holds these conferences will easily set you back a few grand.
So, Michael, let's talk about AI. So you have been studying AI long before you started the DHS. Now you have a doctorate in AI in medicine, and you have been helpful with the college getting in the digital field. You invented a field guide app just for the college, and you've now updated it again. But tell us about your thesis about AI in medicine.
It's interestingly, when I started the doctorate, which was about 4 years ago, I think at the beginning of 2022, initially, I was not planning on doing AI. And so interesting, I remember having a conversation, I think, with yourself and one of the founders of the program. The advice he gave to me is whatever you think your final project is today, so this is 4 years in the past, it will not be the case when you actually end up defending your dissertation. And that was very true. When I started out, I was just really going to do a bit of work around how the journals operate, what the data inside all of those journals mean. But it was only when we had that AI boom, so the introduction of ChatGPT and basically what most people think of as AI, is I started thinking what is this incredible invention called a large language model? What impact is that going to have? I'm sure anyone who's listening, they have probably tried either a ChatGPT, a Gemini, a Claude, and so on. They've asked it medical questions, possibly even research questions. And the answers that come back are always very plausible and very convincing. But oftentimes, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, Aebhric, is the answer is completely or seemingly fabricated or just hallucinating. So what I did started out with my dissertation, and what I started out with was I received a lot of help from the supervisors and the head of the program and sort of forming what my dissertation was going to be. Let me back up 1 second. So whenever a medical person is doing research, typically you will go to Google Scholar, you'll go to PubMed or whichever journal or repository that you'd like to use. You'll go in and you'll type in the keywords. Say, for example, you want to search for the tropical middle area or any other tropical disease or anything you want in the medical sphere. PubMed, for example, will return you specific results based on that search. So my thinking for the dissertation was these databases are all built on technology that is 10, 20, even more sort of decades older. What is it going to look like if AI gets involved in the search method? So my research question was quite simple, is I wanted to see how the current way of searching would compare against call it the new AI way of searching these databases. And what does that mean in terms of complying to the evidence-based medicine standards? I'm talking things like PRISMA, things like the NAS framework, which chats about, or a framework for adopting new technology. So it wasn't just a technical question. It was a socio-technical question, as what is going to be the overall impact, A, on performance, will the AI search do better or worse than the current search methods? And what does that mean in terms of adoption and governance? And what impact will that have on healthcare? So when I started out with this, and the first time I sat with my supervisors, Dr. van Recklinghausen and Dr. Zuber, they immediately cut the scope of my dissertation. I was planning on doing an AI search of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of documents. And being a lone researcher, we actually sat and cut that corpus down to just 439 documents, but specifically in the ACLS domain. And the reason they did that was very simple. So if I got into trouble or wasn't sure about what a lexical search was returning, or what a semantic search was returning, I could very easily sit with those 400 odd documents and work it out myself. How A, it's a very small amount for one person to work through, and B, I understood the material. And that would basically help me sort of pull in the reins and just help me understand my own research. So what I ended up finding was, although the AI search understood my query a lot better, increased the recall or the amount of articles that were relevant to my query, the AI search brought back a very different set of documents than the lexical search. And that is a problem, because one of the things that are surfaced in that research is, with a fixed corpus of information, is you could run the exact query. So two researchers, they could ask the exact same question, and depending on which search mechanism they used, they get back very different results. Often in research, we talk about the smoking gun article, and that is that elusive article that could potentially either derail or significantly shift the outcomes of your research. And if you have this mismatch between your traditional search methods, your lexical search, and your AI search, that is going to create a real problem if you are going to miss very relevant articles. So my research basically did quite a deep introduction into how these AI or LLM search mechanisms worked. We took a bit of a tour of how the current lexical systems work. Too often people will take the underlying mechanisms for PubMed and Google Scholar for granted, so we went into that. I then did a comparison. It did dip quite deep into the statistical side of things, but did a very clear comparison of the results of the AI search, the traditional search, wrote up what that all meant. And the bottom line, or the conclusion of the research, is that it's not about the technology. It's about the evidence itself, and that search, whether it's traditional search, AI search, is an epistemic gatekeeper. So whenever you conduct research, you have to pay real attention to the search mechanism you're using, understand how it's going to bring up the results relative to your research, and that itself needs to be discussed and disclosed in whichever research paper you're working on.
So what is your comment to a academic researcher who just refuses to accept anything coming out of generative AI?
So interestingly, I would agree with that. Is if you're using a general purpose generative AI like ChatGPT or Gemini, as fantastic as those products are, is I would agree with them. Don't use those for your research. However, there are other AI search mechanisms that are very powerful in helping surface information from very large bodies of data. The one who's conducting the research, you really have to be a master of the tools that you're using, or at least understand where you should use something and where you shouldn't. And I have found that when discussing with AI, it's always more useful to discuss specifically which part of AI you're using, because the term AI encompasses probably at the moment hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of different tools. So it helps be very specific. At this moment, I still discourage the use of generative AI for research, but I do encourage the other AI search mechanisms for just helping trawl through these millions of documents. Part of the results of my dissertation, sort of looking forward to the future, is that hybrid use of the traditional way and the AI way are very effective in surfacing additional results and just helping you understand what you have. So throughout my DHS, I've gone through almost 14,000 documents, mostly at the abstract level. But without some of these more sophisticated AI tools, it would have been very difficult to get any sort of understanding out of that sheer volume of data.
So what is your suggestion? Since you've done all the work to the medic, the nurse, the doc out there who is using AI, what platform do you suggest? I've been looking at Perplexity as an option. Obviously, the big ones like ChatGPT, everything that it comes up with is bollocks. That's my assumption. But what about some of these that are specifically aimed at academia?
I had to chuckle at that comment, Aebhric. So I heard another comment from a conference I was watching where the speaker said, if you want ChatGPT on LLM to give you an answer, you have to tell it what the answer is. And that's obviously, I think, highlights some of your frustrations with the tool. What I would suggest on the research side is, again, do your research. There are more and more medically rated or medical research rated tools coming out. I'm sure that the bigger platforms, your PubMeds, your Google Scholars, many of the journals are starting to augment their AI or augment their existing searches with AI. When you are embarking on your research, is take the tools that you are used to, go and have a look to see, have they augmented that with any sort of AI tooling? And then try and understand, how do I leverage that to help my research? The big takeaway is, if you don't fully understand the consequences of using AI in your research, you're probably sort of best to either reach out to someone who does understand how to use the tools, or just proceed slowly on a very sandboxed environment. But definitely don't go in pedal to the metal. Start bringing AI in different flavors into your research. You are going to start getting things like semantic drift, model drift, and stuff which can really mess up your results.
I'm a peer reviewer for a few academic journals, and the first thing that I always do is I look up all of their journals that they've cited and look for DOI numbers. And that is a very quick way to see if one of our students or whoever submitted the journal or article created bollocks using AI. And I have at least 6 times now have immediately kicked back a paper because their DOI numbers were fake, or the research that they're quoting is fake. And that's before I even start looking line by line at what they wrote.
Yeah, that's a real problem, not just in research. Is part of my work, I do a lot of medical education developments in the US. And the exact problem you described is rearing its head in that environment, where the issue is, if you use something like ChatGPT to generate training material, the issue is that particular system is designed for generalized day-to-day use, the layperson, so not specifically medical professionals. The one thing with AI is the output depends on how it's been trained. So if you are going to use it to develop very specialized medical material like we do at CoROM in our environments, you do really need to, if you are going to use it, use a system that supports that particular medical knowledge. There are systems out there that will only generate specific or accurate citations. But even then, the researcher or the author of that paper must go off, not just take the AI's word for it, and go off, read the DOI, make sure it actually correctly supports your claim in your paper. But I think you and I take the similar approach. My approach is just read the abstract, then go and check the citations. I like to make sure that when checking a citation is it just a random citation put there to support a fact? And you will have a 200-page citation article, and all you're doing is surfacing one fact. And that's where I find AI can actually help. If you have a citation, again, to our 200-page article, to take that article, put it through an LLM, and just help me understand, how does this fact relate to the material it's talking about? Because often it's not clear if the article is not cited correctly. But this is something we are working on at the college, slowly but surely. In fact, that's one of my tasks, is actually developing a training module to guide our students on how to use AI safely and correctly to produce research material. And it's a pretty complicated field. But ChatGPT, it's a blessing and a curse because it's so easy to use and those results are very plausible. But if you don't do the work to go and check every little word that comes out of it, you're going to end up in academic trouble, unfortunately.
It's interesting to see how quick that AI is taking off. So 12 months ago, I couldn't spell ChatGPT, and now I'm using it every day and making sure that everything that I see come out of it is verified on some way. So from 12 months ago, having very limited AI capability to the point where now you can type in, create a PhD for me in this, and then it would be a 75-page dissertation. What's going to happen in 12 months?
Yeah, it's definitely on a exponential trend. Ever there is a fair amount of research coming out that LLMs are not going to keep growing exponentially. It's just physically impossible in terms of the processing power. The one thing that is evolving very quickly is the tooling around the LLMs. And specifically, there's a term called RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. Say, for example, you wanted to write that 75-page dissertation on a tropical disease, let's say malaria, for example. It's simply a case of you provide the LLM with as much valid material as possible and just use the tool to generate material based on that, and you sort of read it for accuracy. And I found this during my own dissertation. ChatGPT and Gemini were a great help taking the material I had created and checked, helped me improve the flow, and occasionally would throw something out saying, hey, did you consider this? But then it's a case of do not take his word for it. Take that suggestion, go and research it yourself, and if it's valid, bring it back into your whatever paper you're working on. But if you take all your work, bundle it up, throw it over the fence into AI's backyard, is you are going to get back something that is just not of an acceptable standard and potentially even dangerous.
Good advice. So, Dr. Klopper, what advice do you have for the new medic, the new nurse, the new doc who is just starting out on the career in austere medicine?
So my advice for that is whatever environment you're going to, whether that's the mountains, the deserts, or the jungle, is before you pick up the books and understand all the diseases, the complex medical stuff that we have to deal with that environment, is make sure that you are personally or physically fit and capable of being in that environment, whether it's the physical or the mental rigor that you're going into. Is an issue that I've encountered time and time again, whether it's just a lack of physical fitness, is if you get deployed into one of these environments, those deployments, first of all, are very expensive to get you into that environment. A huge amount of money has been spent to transport you there, set up whatever living environment you need, whatever clinics and so on. If you arrive there and decide physically you can't handle it, this is not for you, and so on, that can become a problem. And I do understand there's an acclimatization to any deployment that you might do. But my advice, and this is the advice I gave to my new rescuers this morning, is before you go into the difficult rescue stuff in the wilderness, get yourself out there, take a backpack, go and spend a few nights, go and bivouac in one of the safer sort of wilderness environments, go hiking, go climbing, be a mountaineer, be a hiker, go on a lightweight expedition. So don't just build up your medical knowledge, just build up your personal experience in those environments. And without that, you do risk potentially either injuring yourself or becoming a liability to the mission that you are trying to so nobly help.
That's a challenge from deployment to deployment. You're going to different areas, aren't you?
Yeah, it's as much as you can try prepare for everything. It's there's always something new, whether it's just the severity of the patients you might deal with. If you're not used to altitude, if you're not used to the humidity. So whatever environment you're going into, is just make sure that you understand what that environment is going to be like. And again, do whatever you can to prepare yourself physically for operating in that environment.
And before we started recording, you mentioned something about your local Air Force. What was that about?
So this morning, I actually was asked just to go and help the local mountain search and rescue and some of the other teams, was to just help them with a dry run for helicopter rescue. And I dispensed the same advice to them is that before you decide to get on the helicopter, and one of the biggest risks to the aircraft is the rescuer themselves. If they don't have all their kits squared away, if they aren't very familiar with all the equipment that they are using, whether it's a carabiner, safety lanyard, if they're not comfortable with their helmets, they're not comfortable with their PPE, the harness doesn't fit right, they're not quite sure how to dress for weather and to layer properly. The second you step into the aviation environment or onto a helicopter, all of those seemingly small, nitpicky issues immediately get compounded. And I demonstrated this several times where we had over 20 rescuers and the capacity of the aircraft is 16. If I'm trying to get 16 rescuers out the aircraft, but if there's even a 30-second delay where someone is fumbling a carabiner, can't get the ear pro on, need to adjust their goggles, that's times 20. You're looking at now potentially a 10, 20, even a longer minute delay in getting everybody safely deployed. And that just circles me back to my original point. Is just make sure that you are very comfortable in that environment and that you can deal with the task load. And the way you do that is take care of the small stuff first yourself. And I even gave the advice is right next to the TV remote in your lounge, put a carabiner, just sit there, get it to a subconscious level, click it open, and get a feel for exactly how it works. So when it comes time to use any of that equipment in anger, it is basically instinctual and second nature.
It's the same advice I give to my students with a 10 mil syringe. In class, they should just have it in their hand and learn how to manipulate it with right hand, left hand, a whole bunch of different ways. It's the hand knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah, it's muscle memory. When I first started out in mountain rescue, I took the same advice I'm giving now. I joined the Mountain Club of South Africa, and every single weekend, every single opportunity I got, I was out there hiking, climbing, using technical rope equipment, and that pays huge dividends to this day in the rescue environment.
That's good advice. So, Michael, thank you for being on our podcast again, and thank you for the 10 years that you've given to the college, and you've gotten a doctorate out of it. I understand is reciprocal, but you are a valued member of our faculty. Thank you.
Thank you, Aebhric, and I look forward to the next 10 years.
This has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine. If you would like to earn CPD credits for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credit, free access to our virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on our college website at corom.edu.mt.